No, just in relation to this common question, Mr. Abraham Avi or Avi Loeb. So he was, as you mentioned there, you might just give a three eye comet, right? I'm just kind of looking it up here as I'm talking.
Yeah.
So like
yeah.
when I see it, I get the feeling they're seeding toward a future event. You know, when I hear them at this kind of stuff. Comets, of course, for time immemorial, have been heralds of all sorts of things. Great events or disasters or whatever, or the new king is born or whatever. Like so, like I mean, but for you to, as you kind of said there, there's some kind of occult or probably Kabbalistic references in that narrative, maybe with dates or times or some of the use of the language. Is that the case that you have found that?
Well, it was discovered on the 1st of July, 2025, and interestingly, the 1st of July, which is a Tuesday, that is the date that in 439 BC, supposedly Ezekiel had his vision of the Merkaba, the chariot, which itself perhaps links with this concept of the unidentified flying object, or the unidentified aerial phenomenon. So again, that's another little tie-in. It's interesting, like it's like what you're saying. They're seeding little psychological associations, almost psychologically gauging the target population in terms of if they will believe the incredible.
On a totally unrelated note, somebody asked me to play in a Nirvana tribute band. This is like a totally different subject, but I started looking into some of the stuff around Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, his death and whatnot. And one thing I found out was that Dave Grohl's father was an advisor to Robert Taft Jr., right? And the Taft family in America, they're a big kind of political dynasty. And but one of the Taft family was the actual founder of the Skull and Bones secret society, the famous secret society. I think they were in Harvard. And another one, the Taft family,
Yale.
were Yale, was it? Yeah, okay. So one of them was the actual founder of that secret society, and another one, the Tafts, was a senior member of the Mormon Church, and was, the Mormon Church there's a lot of conversation about it having connections with military intelligence and whatever, CIA. I don't know. You know what I mean? But the Taft, one of the Tafts, was like a senior minister in that church. So again, just to reverse, it was Dave Grohl's father was an advisor to Robert Taft Jr. as one of that Taft family, and as well Courtney Love, who was Cobain's partner, maybe wife, I think at one point. Her father was he'd worked with the Grateful Dead, the band The Grateful Dead, and the Grateful Dead are also connected in sort of with military intelligence and kind of like shadowy connections into CIA and stuff like that, And Dylan Carlson, who was a friend of Kurt Cobain's, who I actually met a couple of times. Now, when I say met, I met him briefly outside gigs and stuff like that. Said hello, he was the one who gave Kurt the gun that he supposedly committed suicide with, or allegedly committed suicide with. But his father was in turn involved was a military man. I think he might have even been trying to dig it up here. He might have even been like military intelligence or something like that, But anyway, the point being, all around this band is a whole bunch of connections that are. It's not to say there's something unusual going on, but it's like, you know what I mean. There's seems to be a lot of stuff going on with connections to, that world. As well.
Absolutely.
they were signed, I think, originally through Sub Pop, which is a label in Seattle, and the lady that was involved in Sub Pop, that I think was a kind of a key figure with some of these bands, was a lady by the name of Susan Silver, I think was her name. She was a Jewish lady who was she signed bands. I think she was married to your man out of Soundgarden, Chris Cornell.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So at one point she was married to him. Yeah. Susan Jean Silver. So anyway, there's just, I don't know, I got a very weird feeling about like Nirvana being a kind of a construct band, or at least, like, you know, you could say possibly, there's no doubt, you know, you need, obviously need an artist who's got some talent, you know, to create. If one was to create like a David Bowie type band artist who you could shape and potentially, you know, get them to voice some creative content that might have whatever the hell you want in there, Kabbalistic or occult, or, you know, psychological warfare, or kind of, you know, the capacity to shape generation and perception, or, you know, to instill nihilistic kind of self-destructive tendencies in the youth, which arguably a band like Nirvana might have been guilty of, really, or maybe not. But, you know, one could argue that they were, and up to and including these deaths that we see, these kind of celebrity deaths, this so-called 27 Club, if such a thing exists, and you know, this kind of ritual killing of figureheads and kind of role models, perhaps famous people that, you know, that the younger generations will be looking up to. But it's noteworthy. You think that well, the drummer out of Nirvana, his dad used to be an advisor to one of the family who set up Skull and Bones. Like, Dave Grohl's dad advised those people, worked as a political advisor and a journalist with that family. This is a direct, like, that's not a conspiracy theory, that's a matter of historical fact, like, and you're kind of going, huh. And when you take the other stuff into account, you know, you've people connected with the Grateful Dead, Courtney Love, CIA connections there, military intelligence connections, perhaps. You know, I think it's the wider point I'm trying to make is that this stuff seems to be around us all the time, and I think just to try and kind of come up to the current day, right, you know, today, which is the, you know, 24th of August 2025, in the year 2025, things have shifted and changed so dramatically, and this kind of new era, which I think we're now in, actually, and this kind of, like you mentioned the other day in a text to me, this hypernormalization phenomenon, which is kind of what I think we're in. The original term hypernormalization was, I think they were trying to describe Russian society at a certain point in time when communism was breaking down. Exactly. And everybody knew the old system was falling apart, yet they kind of continued on as if everything was okay. So I think this is kind of a similar sensibility around us at the moment, and it's very, I want to say, unsettling. It's very like someone has whipped the rug from under your feet and you're spinning in midair and you're still trying to go along as if everything's normal and nothing has changed, when everything has changed in a kind of a seismic shift, you know. And I think that's kind of where we are. So the reference back to the things like Nirvana and David Bowie, and as you say, these even this gentleman speaking about this comet, which, you know, he's, you know, and so many other narratives and stories, a multiplicity of them, really. It's like a kind of a blizzard effect of information. And I think maybe one possible scenario is that just literally you just have to keep hitting the public consciousness as much as possible with as much kind of dramatic data and scenarios and narratives as possible, including things like cultural output, including things like news media, what is in the news, and to the point where, look, you can kind of dislocate the mass consciousness from reality and kind of shift it on into this kind of uncanny in-between world where you can kind of morph a new reality, or it enables you to create something new, because their perception is shifted and they're kind of up in the air. So you can kind of, once you keep them in the air, you can kind of change things. And I think that's kind of perhaps where we're at, like, as a society. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
Oh, I mean, you superbly articulated that. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's even this. There's several things. I'll post them, and I won't go through all of this. It's a fairly lengthy release. It was released in September 1979, and the subtitle is, the main title is "How the CIA Planned the Drugging of America" by Walter H. Bauert, and the subtext is, did Timothy Leary and the CIA work hand in hand to create the, quote, turn on, tune in, drop out, unquote, drug culture of the 60s, or was Leary a pawn in the CIA's ruthless attempt to deceive America's youth? This also relates to this very strange and impractically idealistic or utopian idea that you see at the turn of the Enlightenment, which is the beginning of individualism. Now, this isn't something that's necessarily unique within Western culture. In fact, most late-stage civilizations, as they go, or even cultures, meaning grand civilizational cultures, like, for example, look at the Abbasids. They themselves went through, as their culture went into a type of winter of discomfort and renewal and pruning and death and renewal. It went through this metamorphosis where it became more individualistic. Previously, most human beings are not necessarily social creatures. They're selectively gregarious, meaning that because of the mutual benefit that you acquire from participating in society and tribes and working hard and bending the knee, so to say, to the cultural framework, and you don't try and covet what your neighbor has, or murder your neighbor for his property. You maintain yourself in these frameworks of mutual cooperation because it provides mutual benefit. You eventually, as civilizations develop and you get away from the village life and you get into, the grand, megalopolises, the cosmopolitan urban sprawl, eventually you begin to see individualization and atomization occur. However, it would appear that in our Western context, and, beginning in basically the 1960s onwards, that the intelligence agencies were actively participating in steering this, right? Because remember, they have, a precedence of 2,000 years or more of history that they can go back, look back on, and it's history that we're not necessarily privy to. So they have all of that as reference material to thus construct and steer these psychological patterns of behavior as civilizations develop. But so it mentions, and I'll just read this really quickly, Operation Mind Control, MK Ultra, of course, stated he chronicled the activities of what was perhaps the best kept secret since the atom bomb. Many civilian scientists and military and government workers violated all known codes of medical ethics and the law in the MK Ultra experiments that declassified CIA documents eventually proved were conducted on unwitting human guinea pigs, and this was all over America. And we had our own thing, our own MK Ultra program. It was run by Tavistock and such, right?
Yeah,
And it was on unsuspecting patients and civilian hospitals. And anyway, the CIA MK Ultra documents vividly expose, quote, the use of doctors, psychiatrists, and military chaplains to hypnotize unsuspecting individuals by a disguised technique, the administering of 149 separate mind-warping drugs to tens of thousands of people. This is why you had the invention of rock and roll as well, right? Both military and civilian, many of whom thought they'd volunteered for harmless experiments, many of whom were totally unsuspecting. The rewarding of prison inmates with heroin for participating in experiments with mind-affecting drugs. The programming of individuals through drugs, hypnosis, and various behavior modification techniques to carry messages locked within their minds behind post-hypnotic blocks. The programming of individuals to kill upon hearing a specified cue. This is what you see with Sirhan and Bobby Kennedy. Like a Manchurian candidate, then upon having killed their target, erasing their memories by the use of ultrasonics, drugs, hypnosis, or other, and then the other parts omitted. So it goes into how Leary began giving lectures on what were the first glimmerings of the psychedelic 60s, and Timothy Leary was a CIA agent. He visited at the 2,000-acre Millbrook estate, from which Leary and his followers operated under organizations known as the International Federation for Internal Freedom, the Castalia Foundation, and the League for Spiritual Discovery, or literally LSD. It was a CIA-backed quango. These organizations did little to further scientific research. Their major accomplishments was to make LSD a household word and to encourage people to try the drug. So, there's more to it, and a lot of it's omitted, of course, but and redacted. But it's effectively showing that rock and roll was nothing more than an expansion of the CIA's MK Ultra program, and that, moreover, as well, each youth subculture within the ensuing generations of the later 20th century, the various decades, right, and all of the various youth subcultures like the hippie movement, the glam rock movement, the punk movement, rockabillys, whatever it may be, and of course later on with grunge in the 90s, it was all to push certain drugs and to deteriorate and to make more potentially to make the youth more malleable, and to ensure that they were more receptive to trying drugs, to trying new drugs, because what they were attempting to do is use the youth subculture, these various youth subcultures, and rock and roll, and the music, and the culture, which was all established. It was a formalized, like Saturnalia, it was formalized, it was a proscribed and an entirely set up social experiment so they could test the effects of these drugs. Why? Because eventually they're going to use these drugs, like how it's discussed in that of Soma, in that of Brave New World, to make the population more receptive to what we would term in today's world as complete, utter enslavement, so that they love their servitude. That is the reason for it. These people are working on, 50 to 100-year plans. So what happens in the 60s will affect the 2060s. I mean, that's how these people function. It's extremely psychopathic, of course. They're working on a totally different level. If we are playing, checkers, they're on 5D chess, if you will.
Well, so I read this somewhere when I was looking at the Nirvana thing, the band, and somebody commented You know, if America, you know, say like they set up America from when? From the 1600s or 1500s, whenever the first people arrived there. You know, so they
Yes,
literally set up
1618.
that society from scratch. So they created, set up, shaped, created that society from nothing. So there you have like a huge experiment. Like literally, here's a patch of land. Let's start a new country. Let's give it an identity. Let's give it a dream. Let's give it a feel. Let's give it a language. Let's give it a people. Let's give it ambition. Let's give it a future. Let's give it, you know, a spirituality. The entirety of that from nothing was created from scratch. Which is, when you think of it, it's a huge thing to contemplate. You know, and the power in and around that. Like, for example, you know, it's so huge. You just focus on one given area. For example, steel. You know, steel in industry. Who controls the steel? Who controls iron? Like, you need steel to build that, to build those cities, to build those railroads, to build tanks and munitions for war. You need control over all that. So like, even that one area, you know, would be a key kind of an area to control for the building that society. So that's the level that that these people are looking at this stuff on. Or as another kind of a thing I came across today was like from 1945 to say the first 5 or 6 years after the war in Germany, there's no history. We don't know really what happened to Germany, to the German people in those first few years. Now, you read between the lines, what was left of that old society had to be destroyed, which wasn't already physically destroyed. It had to be absolutely spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, mentally, physically destroyed. And a new society had to be, you know, rise out of the carcass so of the old. So the power structure had to sort of act as the midwife, the abortionist, if you will, to kill the old, and the midwife to usher in the new kind of screaming fetus that was shaped in the image of you know, its new, if you want to follow the metaphor, it's new kind of maternal, globalist kind of mother who wanted to see a new Germany that had no national ambition, and that had an identity that was shaped, that was given to it, grafted onto its psyche. So, you know, this is secondly, the first example is you know, bringing to bear America. Second example, bringing to bear a new Germany out of the ashes of the old. Like, so they oversaw that transition. They oversaw that entire kind of giving birth, and you know, and if you look into the history, it was trauma is central to that, specifically in many cases, but in the German case, the presence of the Red Army, what happened there with German women and children who were summarily abused, executed, whatever you want, you know, a history that's never been told and never will be told, because it's, you know, Germany's forever in the shadow of the Holocaust. That the Holocaust stands over Germany like an eternal shadow of shame and grief and guilt and horror. It's the horror that hides all other horrors. You know, it's a great example of how Kabbalism and the occult can be deployed in an act of mass sorcery to kind of have these pages from the history book, as you flick through them, they extinguish the candle of any other truth, because that horror is so relentless that no other horror can be contemplated. There's no room left in the psyche to allow in anything else after that. And likewise, a third example, Russia. Russia after the deposition of the Tsar. You know, their stories have never been told. They're untellable. You cannot tell a story of the deaths and murder of 100 million people, that like what happened in Russia. That story on that wider macro social context cannot really be told. You know, there's no way to sort of digest that. Or similarly, you could say in the Vietnam War, Operation Phoenix, which was a concise psychological warfare, terrorist exposition by the West, by the power structure, through the CIA and people like that, organizations like that, and the, throwing people out of helicopters, terrorizing people, raping people, murder, mass murder, all sorts of stuff. And so again, so there's 4 examples of huge undertakings to shape, create, or destroy societies. And these people. This is only those 4 examples are in the last 400 years, approximately, or more. So the amount of data, information, skill, expertise over time that the power structure sort of gains from these activities is immense. So as you rightly say there, that we can't even begin to imagine what they're capable of, really, and what they can do. But there's any thoughts on that, man?
Well, they condition the masses themselves to think along totally distinct lines, right? Lines that are, you could say, from a position of power and the acquisition of power, completely inferior to how they view the world, right? And it's made so through compulsory education. Everything you see within society, of course, though it will be dressed up as humanistic, right? It's designed to entrap the individual into mental paradigms that ensure that they project the power structure itself, right? Now, for example, as Immanuel Kant mentioned, and I mean, this really goes back to Kabbalah itself, funnily enough. I don't know if Kant was actually fully cognizant of that, but it is Kabbalistic in its approach. And he mentioned the idea of the noumenon and the world of appearance, right? And this was also developed by that of Hegel and even Marx, right? Even Marx, of course, and Engels was highly influenced by Hegel. And they really, I mean, it was an expansion of Hegelian philosophy, and Hegelian philosophy was somewhat an expansion of Kantian philosophy in some respects. Some respects it was a total, it diverged considerably. But Immanuel Kant mentioned with the world of appearance that because of the human mind and its effect on its principled effect on the doctrine of the information that we receive from the outside external environment, that the mind itself is almost it's an active organizer of the information. It's not just a passive receptor or receptacle of the information. So therefore, as the objective reality truly is, we can never access that by and large from a practical perspective. That is because we have this, we have so many, I mean, even if one has their own culture in isolation that they've developed, right, within their tribe, or even within their small family group, or even if they're simply isolated, lone wolves, right, living off the grid, the mind itself will generate its own imagination. It will project, almost like a lens distorts reality itself. It projects an appearance of reality that will fit with one's survival, one's need for self-preservation,
Yeah.
one's own, external pressures like the tribe that they may be in, the society, the very geist of the civilization, that which, you live and breathe every day. So the collective unconscious as well, if we want to get into Jungian. So that all affects our minds, right? Once you understand that, once you understand, in fact, that there is an objective reality, but it's inaccessible to us. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as our mind wants to perceive the world, right?
Yeah.
So we see a world of appearances, and all you have to do is be the weaver of the dream, right? If nothing exists but the dreamer, if you are the weaver of the dream and the threader, you establish the thread of the dream, then you can control the reality. Exactly, you guide the wheel with care. This is the idea of even the vortical spiral and all of this notion. So it's you control the tempest. You steer reality. I mean, even for example, I was reading Morals and Dogma recently, right? Of course, it's a huge book and it's more like a reference, but I'll skim read it. It's a bit like the Zohar. You'll look at, you just stumble upon things in it, right? And it mentions, quote, this is page 4, so it's right at the beginning, and it's in a section titled 1, Apprentice. The 12-inch rule and the common gavel. Force, unregulated or ill-regulated, is not only wasted in the void like that of gunpowder burned in the open air, and steam unconfined by science, but striking in the dark, and it blows meeting only the air, they recoil and bruise itself. It is destruction and ruin. And then he goes on to, describe it in sort of exhaustive detail. Essentially, what he's discussing there is that if it's unregulated or ill-regulated, if it's not steered, remember cybernetics, kybernetikos, the steersman. If you're not steering it, then eventually it's going to be completely wasted potential. And wasted potential is chaos, right? It produces nothingness. It produces the void. So in essence, it's like the banks, right? What do the banks do? Well, the banks steer, of course, the economy through the monetary system, right? Through inflation and deflation of the monetary supply. This is why you have crises. The crises are not actually because of, the corruption in the system, though it's somewhat that case. But these crises are engineered when you really get down to brass tacks. And it's designed to actually deflate or to erase the money in the system. Why? Because money is infinite, right? If you have something that's infinite, firstly, what you have to do to establish a scarcity mindset regarding that, what actually is in all actuality an infinite resource, is you have to make the individuals, the vast majority who are in receipt of this in all actuality infinite resource, i.e. money, you have to firstly get them to work to give up something that's finite in exchange for this infinite resource, which is utterly worthless, i.e. you give up your time, you work to thus have money. So thus it establishes within your mind the physical, again back to Immanuel Kant, the physical appearance of scarcity, thus the physical appearance of value associated with money, right? Because time is valuable because we're mortal, thus if we exchange it for money, money by proxy must also be valuable. Or you have the crises which delete money from the system, quite literally. Thus it creates that scarcity model and reinforces it. That's just one example. I mean, wars do the same thing. It's a similar principle. Again, it's them shaping like a mason. They're dressing the stone of the world, shaping it so it establishes the vision that they desire. And then he goes on to state, the blind force of the people is a force that must be economized and also managed as the blind force of steam, lifting the ponderous iron arms and turning the large wheels, is made to bore and rifle the cannon and to weave the most delicate lace. It must be regulated by intellect. the technocrats, the intellectual class.
Mm.
Intellect is to the people and the people's force what the slender needle of the compass is to the ship, its soul, always counselling the huge mass of wood and iron, and always pointing to the north. So he continues on, but it's the same idea, right? It's this notion that you have to. The banks control the river, right? The river is the celestial constellation of the Eridanus in the astrotheological sense. If Orion is man, if we are the headless dreamer of this reality, if you will, this imagination of reality in that sense, then they must steer this blind force of the masses vis-a-vis the banks at each side of the river, right? Which steers the currency, which steers the liquidity. It's written into the terminology of the financial class as well. You economize that force, as he stated. You economize it through the narratives that they weave, the hypernormalization, right? And a very interesting concept of hypernormalization, because as we stated, it was right at the end of the Soviet managerialist system, right? When you had the likes of Chernobyl, which, by the way, the first thing they attempted to do with the managerialist system of the Soviet Union when they had Chernobyl is that they tried to actually cover it up, right? And when they realized they couldn't cover it up, then they went into damage control. So they did everything bar try to deal with the issue and deal with the problem. And you're going through the same thing throughout the West. See, once the West collapses in a similar fashion, because of course it's the same sort of managerialist system, it has the same hallmarks. When you go through this competency crisis, and we already really are in that, many years after, when we're looking back in retrospect at the old managerialist Western system, you'll begin to pick out little things like that, just completely incompetent things that were buried by the managerialist system. Of course, things not as quite as big as Chernobyl. Maybe we will have our own Chernobyl in the future, but who knows? But what it does is it tries to create a distorted reality. That surreality actually becomes not totally normalized. This is why you have paralogical reasoning, and that has really taken over the academic institutions and society. And what do we mean by paralogical reasoning? Paralogy, or legitimation by paralogy, is what was his name? Jean Lyotard. I forget his second name, but he was a postmodern philosopher. He coined the term. It's this idea that you go beyond. You go beyond logic, right? So you employ ideological, emotional, histrionic reasoning, if you will. So it's everything is viewed through the lens of ideology. So, for example, this is why you can have contradictory beliefs, such as, well, for instance, right, transgenderism. You can have a man who is transitioning to a female, but it's simultaneously at the, in a sort of weird, surreal sense, you also have absolutely no definition of what a woman is. You ask any individual of the woke variety what a woman is, and they will actually actively avoid answering the question, or they'll give you some utterly inauthentic and insane reason, such as, a woman is whatever you identify as, right? So it becomes meaningless at that point because of definable characteristics and unique characteristics, and its universality, its lack of exclusivity. So it's that type of idea that you see. And by the way, that started all the way back with the hippie movement, the same idea, tune in and drop out. Anything goes, essentially. It was preparing us for it. It was seeding psychologically that narrative in us,
Yeah. It's itself, the hippie, as an example, like heavily infiltrated by the CIA. I mean, Haight Ashbury and you know, it was heavily, if not orchestrated from the get-go by the power structure, as I understand it, or at least infiltrated by it. And famously, Charlie Manson and Sharon Tate murders. Her father was Sharon Tate's father was a military intelligence officer, and as you're kind of getting into there, it's perception management and the creation of kind of mass consciousness, trying to shape how people perceive things and see things. But I mean, I was actually listening to a previous chat you had with Armin, and you know, there's this kind of idea, events, dear boy, events. You know, what happens in the world around us is sort of punctuated by events. They may be historic, or you know, there could be some sort of weather trauma or a war, or there could be cultural. You know, there could be some new movement in music or an economic event or whatever. But by and large, the stamp of, and I kind of drifted in some of the stuff you talk about here, but Saturn, the father of time or whatever, is marked by these events. That's his fingerprint. That's how we know he's passing and history is moving and things are changing around us, because we have this chapter of events that give us a linear impression that things are moving in a certain way. Do you know what I mean? So we've had technology in the 20th century, the development of the microchip. We had the computer, the mobile phone. We had, you know, mass media online. Then now we have AI, artificial intelligence or machine learning. And soon we understand that we'll have a biodigital convergence, these huge leaps. But these are the events, as it were, the punctuation of the Saturnian father of time, Jabalon, you know, the demarcation of the five sense reality. But like Armin made a point in the last chat that you had with him, and he kind of was saying like that some of the events, and this ties in with what you're saying, are absolutely and completely engineered and orchestrated. So this is back to this idea of he who guides the wheel with care, you know, the Sator square kind of thing, that if events happen naturally, and this is a kind of a black magic thing, like events will happen naturally. If we live on the island long enough, various things will happen. A coconut will fall on someone's head. A whale will wash up on the beach. We'll have a bad winter and a good summer. You know, one day a ship will go past and we'll shout and they'll try and grab their attention, but they won't see us. And various things will happen over time. But there will be the events that dictate our experience on the island. But as it were, the shapers and the power structure creating their own events, as it were, are to fabricate and manufacture this mass consciousness that has its identity shaped by these events, like, and like, as has been stated in some of the, you know, the power structure, some of the books that they've put out, and some of the thinking is that the organization of man has to be reshaped when a new technology you know, comes into the social sphere. So the new technology that we have now is causing a reordering of our society. And but there again, it's as you said there, the metaphor of and the book what you're reading there, the steam that's, you know, causing the wheels and the pistons to move, like this energy that's this latent energy that's in social man is funneled thereby by the movement of these events, and fabricated or otherwise, or the unleashing of these technologies. So we're sort of led by the nose, as it were, and we're, as you said there, it's an interesting point. And again, I think it's like you know, it's a very occult kind of a chaos magic idea that your consciousness is actually creating this world around you, or it's in this symbiotic relationship with the perceived reality, your consciousness, and your consciousness is in turn affected to a large degree by the input or by the hand of the sorcerer, what they're feeding to you. Not just to you as an individual, but ultimately to you as a kind of a social person as well, or a person who lives in the society, that works with people, that is in a relationship with people, that goes down to the shop to buy a litre of milk off somebody, that's interacting and driving in a car through traffic or whatever it may be. You're in some way, shape or form sort of inevitably a part of the society, so your consciousness is as well. So it's an interesting, very, very interesting area. Like, I mean, the psychology, the human mind, the part or the role that it plays in all this is sort of a key component, because I think the power structure understands it in a very intrinsic and deep, and they understand the complexity of it, and they understand how to manipulate it, So I think if we can figure that out, or at least have some awareness of it, it puts us in a position of power. So maybe that's the new warfare. The new weapon is to try and, it's a consciousness warfare as well as a spiritual warfare. It's like a battle for our own minds, if you will. The battle back to try and cast out the empire that's been built in our own minds. So the new empire is actually in your mind, as it were. And how do you go about doing that? It's very wise man sort of warfare. It calls for a huge knowledge and understanding of the game. And it calls for a lot of observation and reflection and understanding. So I think that's where the new warriors and rebels will be of that nature. But it's tempting to think of them as Christ figures, or Gandhi figures, or but maybe they won't be so spiritual in a kind of a traditional or kind of a phony sense, or kind of a tacky sense of that word. Maybe they'll be the new, because I do have that sense that there will be a new people that will arise out of this stuff. They'll adapt and they'll overcome. But I think they'll be very tuned in onto this kind of stuff, and they'll find a way around it. Anyway, that's my kind of feeling on it. That's what I hope. What do you think?
It's back to that idea that the domain, like what you're saying, that the empire, the imperial domain that they are building is completely built, or it's projected by the minds of the subjects. But one has to almost willingly subject themselves to it. No one can control or rule over a subject that does not want to be a subject, or does not want to be ruled, right? That is feisty, so to say, right? That is completely recalcitrant in their ways. So that must, again, you have to develop the false memories. That's something Armin, states, and essentially the false memories are the pseudo environment, the literal cogs that are pieced together narratively, the narrative chains that manufacture the grand, sepulcher of the subject's mind, right? You literally entomb them. And by the way, this links with hypernormalization, because what was stated by what was his name? Alexei Yarmchuk, I think his name was. Anyway, he was the individual that coined the term, and he mentioned that in the Soviet system, right at the end, everyone knew that it was effectively over. No one believed in the ideological positions of the state. It lost all legitimacy, essentially, which is the lifeblood for any state. Again, because to maintain the fanciful charade of the pseudo environment, of the heterotopia, the world within a world, right? This manufactured reality, you have to control the minds of the subjects. They have to legitimize the naturally illegitimate system, right? So all systems of power, all power itself, it's artificial. It's based upon the subjects themselves. But he mentioned that no one actually had any viable alternative. So you were left in this limbo state. It's similar to how we're feeling now. I don't know if it's the same in Ireland, but in the UK, I think most people actively want they want rebellion. They want a complete disillusion of the British establishment. In fact, I've actually myself, I've even abandoned this idea of Britain. There is no Britain. You know, the idea of British, or to be a Briton, or even the British establishment, it was one of these false memories. It's a pseudo environment. There is no British people. You have the English, Irish, Welsh, and Scots, right? Those are the people of these isles, right? So it's there really is there is no British identity. It was something that was invented, and we can even see the meaninglessness of it today. I mean, the Commonwealth, those individuals are also afforded the title of British, right? Even though they're nothing to do geographically with the quote British Isles, right? So it's, I mean, you see these pseudo environments that are created by the perception managers, and power itself is the outgrowth of all of this. I mean, there's a very interesting book. I would implore that people read it. It's called Public Opinion. It was published in 1922 by Walter Lippmann, and I don't have the quote on hand, but it goes something like, the picture in our heads of the outside world, is either in whole or in part misleading, right? And that the real environment is altogether far too complex, it's far too big and, if you will, fleeting to be properly intellectually acquainted with. This is the same idea that Immanuel Kant mentioned. So what you must do as an individual who desires power, who desires to steer the big mass of people to a certain destination, to realize your ambition as a would-be potentate, is that you must create a simplified version of reality. You must create an imaginarium of it. And this is where the demiurge concept, or even the Saturnine archetype, comes in. You become the literal weaver of time itself. It's a very interesting concept, and he mentions that through public relations, and they were talking about modern public relations in that book, and propaganda, that you could bring the public to operate in what it believes is objective reality, but in fact is but a simplified and manufactured one.
Absolutely.
And this is brought about to maintain order. But these are things that are well understood. You quite rightly brought up, and I mean, very, very splendidly articulated that this is what the occult sciences are. Effectively, it's ancient psychology and how to control people, and thus by controlling people, you ensure that they become the conduits for your projection of your vision for reality. You abracadabra, you create reality through the word that you speak to them, the idea, which they then internalize and thus externalize by living it, right? Because remember, the expression of will is action and manifestation. And I mean, this is how they've run. This is how they run the world. And like what you're stating, what you must do is exercise yourself of all of these false memories. So even by the way, even the nation state is a false memory, like what we were stating with Britain. But even the idea of the Republic of Ireland, even Scotland, right? All of these things are false memories. They're ideas. The nation state doesn't really exist. I mean, what do I have in common with a Glaswegian, right? Apart from the common lingo, which, I mean, arguably isn't so common, because some of the Glaswegian accent is totally unintelligible to me. as my accent would be unintelligible to people probably from the borders if I was really thick in my accent. And it's the same thing with people from that speak Doric and from Aberdeen and such. Those people have nothing in common with them. The Highlanders. I'm a Lowlander, and so it's a totally different culture. But we have the artificial umbrella that we're all Scottish. But what is Scottish?
Yeah.
It's really an amalgam of Pictish, Norse, Vikings, Gaels from Ulster, and the Welsh from Strathclyde. So, I mean, and
well, absolutely, they're absolutely constructs. They're as you say, false memories are artificially manufactured concepts. But it's a very interesting area to contemplate. And what comes into my head is the child who looks to the mother or the father for security and for to be guided away from fear, from the bogeyman. And as you said, the power structure is presenting a simplified version of reality with basic dialectical, plus and minus to give the illusion of choice and to present this is the safe way and this is the dangerous way, to present that to the child or the society, as it were. But I think it there's something going on there that's deep in the human psyche, kind of Freudian. The child mind is alive, sort of, in the social psyche, and the child's mind. All of us are adults coping in the real world, but deep down there's still that the child is alive in us, and some part of our brain perhaps is locked in childhood, albeit in a kind of a way we've managed to deal with it, or harness it, or control it a little bit, and become adults and grow up. But there's a bit of us that need that. Like COVID was actually probably a good example of that, like a very good example of it, where you were absolutely presented with the narrative en masse, and you saw in a very stark way how the society reacted to the presentation of information. And it was so pronounced and so just exaggeratedly pronounced. The reaction, the social communitarian or reaction was, it was really remarkable, and it's something that was very intense to live through, I think, from that perspective, because you could really feel the cogs of that machinery of human consciousness and reaction and fear and dependency on the power structure, whatever the state, the powers that be, to guide us through what was perceived as an existential threat, so we turn to the mother, turn to the father, to guide us out of it, but very interesting concept, man. I think trauma plays a huge part in trauma, and fear play a huge part in it, and it's tied into our very nature in a very, very deep way, because our quest to exist and to survive and to adapt and overcome it goes way back, and it's something that's really deeply kind of sewn into our DNA, our bone marrow, is to survive. And fear is a huge factor in that. It's the fear of not having any food, or fear of invasion by the enemy, or fear of the wolf, or the cobra, or the lion, the tiger in the village. It preys on us in that sense. So and the power structure have expertly understood this, and they understand how this social mind, how it works between us in the village and in the town, in our families, our communities, how we look to each other for we use this kind of collective reasoning to assess situational awareness and to come up with the best decision, And all of this is the architecture. They understand it very, very intrinsically, and it's almost frightening when you look at it like in that sense, because it has a kind of a, like right now as I'm speaking to you, I'm looking out the window, and right across the road I can see a typical 3-bedroom semi-detached house. And as I speak about this subject, and I'm looking at that house, the house itself takes on a kind of an uncanny, a kind of a strange, and almost it fills me with a kind of an anxiety, because I can see the house in through a different set of eyes now. I see the house as, somebody's castle against the great exterior, and it's almost like a projection of their own mind that serves, the concrete wall and the apex of the roof and the windows like eyes looking out for danger. It's like a projection of their own mind, and how insular that becomes, and in a way how it can entrap them, I suppose, inside their own minds. And there's an anxiety deep down there, kind of a certain manifestation of fear that's that pulses around people, and I can understand it, but it must be overcome, I think, because I don't think you should ever become enslaved by that. If anything, it should serve as a guide for you to march forward, kind of when you do feel that. Society should do that as well. I think the individual should do that. They should use it not to be as such afraid of the thing, but more to use that fear as a, right, this is what I've got to now charge into. I've got to charge toward this thing. That's, the fear is there as a signal. It's there as a kind of a beacon. Right, charge this way, avoid nothing that you fear should be avoided, it should be confronted. It should be charged at kind of head on, because that's how you keep your spirit in its best kind of vibrational state. You don't allow it to be curtailed by it. But I feel like the world we're in now is severely curtailed, and there's a kind of a deadening. It's not so much a fear and an anxiety kind of a sense, but it's more of a deadened existence where certain parts of us and perhaps the world around us have kind of shut down, and they've been concreted over and kind of, consigned to, don't look into that, don't look over there. So it's become this kind of an angular reality that's prescribed and created by the sorcerers, by the power structure that we're in. But you mentioned about a false memory. There's other memories that are kind of they've been walled over. They're memories that we kind of have a distant sense of, but they're lost, if you will, because they're the parts of ourselves that we've sort of hacked off of this society as had amputated in this new world, and we have a vague memory of them. They're like ghost aspects of the self which we've lost, and we can't articulate what that is, but we just have this vague sensibility that something has been lost, and whatever kind of a harness has been thrown around us, a yoke. The new world is like a yoke. It's a shackled thing that we've come to accept. We've accepted it sort of en masse, At the same time, there's a kind of a delirium, like you said, this hypernormalization. There's a kind of a delirium, a kind of a whirlpool of like a feeling of being lost, combined with some sense of a kind of an apathetic hope. Perhaps something better is coming. And this is this kind of a almost like a traumatic kind of a sensibility that we're in. There's a, even though we're at odds with this present in some way, there's some kind of a distant feeling of, okay, maybe something good is coming, and we just got to ride it out now, because, this is what they're saying on the news, and this is what the reality is, and you know what I mean? So I kind of think that's where things are. But it only becomes frightening when you stand back and look at it. if you step outside it for a sec, it's like it's overwhelming, I think, because
yeah.
would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. See, when you begin to look at the shadows at the periphery of society and culture, it does become completely overwhelming. When you really see, or you try to see reality as it is, when you really look at the culture, I mean, not you're not doing it in a partial way. You're not trying to necessarily have a certain ideological stance when you're viewing it, but when you just look at it neutrally. And the first book that I did was that, and when you really observe reality from the point of view of the hermit, if you will, and you just view it impartially, I mean, you begin to see the shadows of it. It's like, living with a spouse for, I don't know, 20 years, right? A lot of people don't necessarily, a blissful marital state would be one that doesn't necessarily look at their spouse in a manner in which is
Forensic.
Yeah, forensic, or it's highly analytical, right? You love them for who they are, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's good in terms of marriage, but of course it's not very great when you're in society, right? Because unlike marriage, you have in society, like what we're discussing here, interspecies predators. So you have to be constantly cognizant of that, and you yourself have to be a predator to some degree. And yeah, so you have to take that forensic approach to looking at things in society. You have to see the ugliness of it, to thus to not necessarily just become completely captivated by the ugliness and locked into that view and focus, but to appreciate the beauty as well.
To me, the ugliness of it is this kind of a numb, discrete terror that is this sort of mass compliant, hypnotic, Borg-like. It's like, it's not, the Borg is probably a bad example, because what I see are lines and lines of people that are marching in formation that are deep down in their soul are at odds with this reality, like. But they've accepted it through a kind of a trauma matrix, or a trauma kind of I don't know. There's a mechanism there where they're afraid, deep down somewhere, and they've, as you said earlier on, they've been taught to love this. They've been taught, or schooled, or that this to gravitate toward this new system, that this is the best thing to do. And they've packaged away, like the shadow then that casts, the bit of them that they've lost, and the bit of freedom and spirit that has been lost, it's when you look at that in the total picture, it's terrifying, I think. But it's a strange type of terror. It's a kind of a numb anxiety. It's a distant terror that has been suffocated with pillows. As it tried to go to sleep in bed, it's been suffocated with damp pillows, kind of thing. And it's a kind of a horrific, unspoken thing that not many people know about. It's best left not to mention it at all. So it has that kind of a dull, horrific kind of a tinge to it, to the extent that you can't look at it. It's that uncomfortable and unsettling. You cannot look at it. So the society, I think, cannot look at this stuff. It doesn't have.
It's Dorian Gray. They park it in their subconscious, don't they?
Yeah. But it's only when you sort of extrapolate it and just put words on it and actually look at it that it is quite horrific. I mean, it's I don't know what to say about it, man. It's, anxiety is just a word that springs to mind. And that dull terror. That deep under all this stuff, that the projection is technology. Relative. Things have never been better. In Ireland, the economy is supposedly doing well. We're going into kind of hyperinflation kind of territory, and everything is increasingly more expensive, and things are changing so much. The social landscape has completely altered. We've people from all over the world here, so we've suddenly overnight become gone from a bog, forgotten about in the middle of nowhere, to a multicultural society overnight. In a half a generation. And I like the projection is hyper modern as well. Hyper modernization, technology, and it's futuristic. It's cutting edge. It's the best that science has to offer. And then you've got this big black crack going down across the canvas, which is at odds with this presentation of this technological masterpiece. And this black crack is like the world is falling apart at the same time. It's like the West crumbling, and this these narratives we have, war narratives, economic narratives, unhinged leaders, so there's a whole lot going on, and I think just the way it has affected people. And then one must be careful to analyze one's own analysis and say, well, am I being pessimistic here? Am I being, have I a fatalistic attitude about this? Have I got am I balanced enough to look at this? And that's why, it's important for me to ask you, do you have any of the same sense of the thing? And if you answer yes, and I say, well, there's one other person who, it's not just me who is feeling this way or kind of has this sense.
I am impartial the way that I look at things, so I'm constantly second guessing myself. But you have to do that if you're seeking, to take a scholarly approach to this, and you're trying to give it the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps you always leave that idea in your mind, perhaps I'm totally wrong about all of this, but nothing ventured, nothing gained, that idea. So you analyze to the best of your ability. I don't necessarily try to, when I started looking at all of this, I've got to be honest, it was my own intuition that I had from an early age, which I cultivated over years and years. This was prior even to the advent of the internet. So I had an intuition that there was something not necessarily quite right in terms of hierarchy and power, and how power, establishes its footprint on the souls and the minds of people. And even in the West, when it was fine in the early noughties, and even in the early 2010s. Once I left high school in about 2014-15, I was about 18, 19 at the time, and it was at that point there was some sort of strange, bewildering shift in everything in the society, and you really started to see the cracks. The cracks were visible to those who could look. To the point now where even the normative people, the middle class, they're starting to see the cracks in the edifice of this now rotten temple. Ultimately, like what you were stating, it's the ghosts. It's the ghosts of our past that are left. They're left in this state of, a sort of irresolute state, right? And they exist in the periphery, but all the shadows that you're seeing within the culture today, that are again in that completely unresolved state. They're all the neuroses, everything you see, even the drug addiction, the literal cracks in the edifice themselves. All of that is, of course, it's steered and it's engineered, but in a deeper collective unconscious sense, it is emerging as well from our own unresolved ghosts from our own unresolved past, which are screaming through and establishing the cracks within the edifice itself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's breaking us all down, and really, I mean, it's destroying people. You only have to, I mean, to prove that the West is in a state of, well, at least decline, right? All you have to do is have a 5 to 10 minute conversation with the average university or college student, for example, in the UK or Ireland or the US, and quiz them on their general knowledge and ask them fundamental questions surrounding gender, sex, God, anything really, or even the history of their own nation. They're all oikophobic, right? They have a rational hatred for their own country. That's not something that's healthy, and it's not something that, of course, lends itself to the longevity of a culture. That's a culture that's in a state of frenzied auto-cannibalization. And it's been possessed by the ghosts or the demons of their unresolved past. It's basically.
Well, I think what you just said there, man, is you've hit Ireland on the head. That is exactly a succinct summary of Ireland, the Irish psyche, 2025. One that is what is the term you use? Auto-cannibalistic, kind of self-hating, self-destructive. That is, as you said, they're possessed by the spirit and ghosts of its own unresolved past. That is bang on what I'm seeing among Irish, among the Irish, the native population, as it were, like, you know. And there's a kind of a disdain. There's a disdain, like, for each other, you know, kind of a.
I've noticed that as well here as well. Yeah,
not across the board now, but I see it. I see it, for example, in the workplace. When we started the conversation talking about construction, and specifically in the Irish thing, you know, that will be the experience. This kind of a bullying, self-hating kind of, I don't know. It's a toxic atmosphere. I mean, even talking to people who've gone abroad, they've said it's so much better in Australia or even in England. It's much better compared to, because we're kind of in an implosive, like, you may be in a society that's imploded, but you may not realize that society has imploded. Do you know? And most of the people have not realized that. And they're sorry, I know I cut across you there. I'll go back to you in a second, but like, people in the society that has collapsed in on top of itself and is showing all these symptoms of, you know, these negative symptoms and toxic symptoms, pathological symptoms. They may not be aware of the dynamic that's causing that. They're just participating, a social individual participating in that world without that sense of awareness. So now, if one has the awareness, as I'm hoping to have, and perhaps I'm sure you are as well, hoping to develop a sense of awareness about what's going on around us, we're able to extricate ourselves from the morass to a certain extent. Like, we still suffer it because we're surrounded by it, as it were, but we have an edge in that we understand where it's coming from, kind of thing, and what it actually is, because we've reflected on that, you know. But a lot of people, they're actually participants, if not the progenitor. They're the actual causal agent in that scenario. So that's why, like, you know, there's a whole other conversation here to be had around any sense of political righteous kind of leadership or political sensibility of altruistic sensibility to help our fellow man in this scenario might be completely ill-advised, because our fellow man might be the one who's actually the perpetrator of these things, or if he may try to defend it or actively fight for it, because he's so deeply entrenched in that kind of the conditioning that his mind has been put through. So, that's another facet of it. That's another facet of the terror of the 3-bedroom semi-D, is now a fractal castle of the power structure. And the minds that inhabit it are their knights and soldiers, you know what I mean? Their corporals lurk therein. And you look, I'm looking across the road, how can I help these people? These people are actively working for the men. They're like the capos in the camp, they're the lieutenants. They've acquiesced. So, you throw your mind back to what would it have been life like in the Soviet system, where people were reporting on their neighbors, and there was telephone calls, and people were being brought into the basement, and electric cables strapped onto them, and information given about people, and petty grievances been passed on to the commissar. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a dark kind of a turn that things can take. But
Well, remember that the castle eventually becomes the prison of the king.
Yeah.
So you become isolated in your own authority, and what is authority? It's an imaginary. It's a false memory. It's an imaginary status, and eventually, when individuals no longer play by the collective polite rules of the given society, that imaginary status, well, it gets proven that it's totally imaginary, similar to the emperors of Rome, right? I mean, you even know that we're in a state of decomposition because, I mean, this is a bit of an abrasive analogy, but you look at any civilization in its late stage and it goes through cycles of mass immigration. And that's not necessarily to say the immigrants are bad themselves, but the immigrants themselves are the complete diametric opposite of the dead culture, which has become the civilization, and who in turn has become the city has become the world, if you will, as Spengler stated. And this is a central and key point in the decline of civilizations. And this is where you get the aberrant and very untraditional and dare I say deviant lifestyle choices beginning to pop up and become normalized in this hyper-normalized morass of the late stage civilization. But they become very effeminate, very weak, very impotent. The late stage civilization, which of course the immigrants are not. The immigrants still have not necessarily heroic masculinity, but they have this tendency to act more akin to what we were within our upstart phase, right? When when the culture was beginning to be birthed within the tribes and within the tribes and the villages and the towns, and where the people of the land still were there, and the traditions, right? That was the fire of the earlier conquests of that now late stage civilization. The immigrants take on that quality. But what happens at the late stage civilization is that the late stage civilization effectively is a decayed and decomposed carrion. It is almost a turd, and it's surrounded by the flies, right? It's similar like what we were talking about with the construction, right? The end of the project, like vultures, they pick clean the carcass. It's the same idea. It's not I mean, immigration is not, I repeat, especially unskilled immigration, which again, that's what usually occurs at late stage civilization. That is entirely an indicator that you're in a state of decomposition as a society. Spengler already mentioned this as well. I wrote some notes, and I just found them there. And he mentions in The Decline of the West, this is in the second volume, so he makes the distinction between civilization and culture. And he states that culture is organic and plant-like, tied to the land, tradition, and a deep-seated unconscious wisdom. Its towns and villages grow naturally with streets that follow the terrain and buildings that serve as extensions of the landscape. civilization is the artificial intellectual and this is the literal translation from the German, the land alien. It is the product of the brain or the intellect over the soul. The world city, where essentially the city becomes the world. This is the idea that in the late stages of civilization, people become so utterly self-absorbed. They engage in navel gazing to such an extreme and unhealthy degree that, for example, when Western Rome collapsed, you find that most of the contemporary writers were in total disbelief at the collapse of it. Because again, they were so insulated by the city, which became the world. It became their world, their little echo chamber, their bubble. The rest of the society, the rest of the world rather, didn't exist, right? The rural areas didn't exist. They were, the silly little pagans, right? Pagan means rural person. Same with heathen, right? So,
well, this is kind of what I foresee. Sorry to cut across you.
That's okay.
Just as a quick aside, is the current status of, if you will, Britain, England, post-empire, because now that the empire has come home to roost, it's the imperial mind, the jingoistic kind of mind in the empire, in the metropole, was the city that became the world. They were the sons of empire that grew up in that world, in that industry, through those militaries, in that economy, in that culture, in that cultural product of everything from pop culture to the novel, to the painting, to poetry. And, all of it was the great gift of the imperial identity. And suddenly, that world has, in a very, very stark way, collapsed in a very sudden and violent way right in front of their face. And now those streets are filled with their former subjects. And they're on equal footing with them, in the city, on an equal footing, and in the neighborhood. And it's been such a violent twist of fate that is absolutely where I see that England, Britain, if you will, is, and not just Britain, but perhaps the West and the old world, rather, more on a more macro sense, is in this sense, this hypernormalization. Again, where they cannot. So they did the same thing really with communism in Russia, because likewise the party was all, the party, the commissar, to be allied with the party and the comrades and that system. Every the energy that went toward it, the sense of identity that came with it, the approval that came with it, the social organization that came with it, the entire scope of that consciousness projection of that reality came tumbling down in such a spectacular fashion that those people were traumatized, and they could not accept that fact that their glorious world had disappeared. So similarly, I think with Britain, where Britain is now post-empire, she can't, they can't come to terms with it at all.
Yes, I agree with you. Essentially, we're living off the fumes of that empire economically. But even from a cultural standpoint, like what you were mentioning, the decolonization, right? You had the likes of Lord Salisbury and other individuals at the time. They wanted to decolonize and to effectively break apart the empire. Well, they still maintained control over it through a Commonwealth structure, but they wanted to do that because, of course, they were students of history, and they realized that, well, given the trajectory of the empire and its burdensome costs, that there's no way they would be able to keep up with maintaining it. So it was far easier to simply just fragment it. And moreover as well, there was... Britain was losing its edge, both technologically, and the rest of the world was really catching up with it, especially the US. So to hold on to the empire at that point in time was untenable. So the decision was made to simply decolonize, and there was other ulterior reasons for it. But like what you're saying, that wasn't necessary. We didn't lose a series of battles. It wasn't something that was easily reconciled within the minds of the British, if you will, right? The British zeitgeist, and it actually it did completely diminish us in terms of how we viewed ourselves. I mean, to the point now where the individuals in effectively what Britain is you have the financial capital of London and a third world nation tacked onto it.
Yeah.
People around the world don't realise how bad Britain is outside of London.
Yeah.
In fact, London is quite, it's a complete, that's its own type of apocalypse. But Britain outside of London is effectively a third world nation. There's places like Birmingham, which has become so demographically replaced that you've in essence got a sort of microcosm of Pakistan there, and India, with all of the trappings of uncollected rubbish, sanitation, which is diminishing at a precipitous rate. And this is the thing we have to understand as well. When you're in that decline phase, see, when the collapse comes, it comes suddenly, right? We're already a collapsed, destroyed, decomposing, deracinated country. And I hate to, I hate to be the herald of doom, but I mean, it's fairly obvious, even to the British people that are watching this, even to people in Europe, from Ireland, France, they'll be able to understand what I'm stating here. The Americans are a little bit more optimistic. They're a little further behind on the trajectory here, but even Canada as well. But Britain it's already dead. It just doesn't know it yet. It's like in the stages of grief currently. It's been in the stages of grief ever since decolonization, right? And we're in a sort... We still are, in fact, in a sense of denial, right? Which is the first stage. And the denial itself is coming from this need to virtue signal. This is the irony of a late-stage civilization. Everything that it states, all of its trans values, right? And I mean trans values as in not necessarily transgenders, but trans values as in it's fleeting, they change. There is no traditional values now. They're in this weird postmodern idea of, there is no truth. We just make it up as we go along. We create the traditions in this sort of fleeting, momentary, utilitarian manner. And it's so... Essentially, they talk about, well, we need immigrants because we don't want to be Little England or Little Britain, right? Meaning, we don't want to be isolated. We want to be global Britain. And this is the problem with the British mindset and the British establishment. They pay inordinate amounts in foreign aid because they're pretending. They wear the mask of pretense. They are pretending to still be an empire, right? While in fact they're a two-bit failing economy, and the entire Westminster government since at least the 1960s, its policy has been one of managed decline, and it's becoming it's becoming an incontestable fact that we have completely weak and inept leadership. And in fact, this is the irony too. Well, before I get to that, the irony is with Little Britain and Little England, and we have to accept immigrants, and we have to be multicultural, and so on and so forth, and essentially we have to be oikophobic, meaning we destroy our own culture and our own sense of national identity, even if that is a false memory in and of itself, because we want to be virtuous and forward thinking. But the problem is, this is all stemming from London. That's the culture, the cosmopolitan culture of London. And as we've mentioned, the world cities, the cosmopolitan megalopolises, these great worldly cities, effectively, they themselves are completely self-absorbed and out of touch with reality, right? That's the irony of it. They're wanting to be, we have to be, we have to have all of these weird values that will eventually lead to our symptomatic and inexorable collapse, incurable collapse, because, we want to be outwardly charitable and generous and magnanimous and blah, 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 blah. And in fact, it's the complete opposite. This is what you see in late-stage civilizations. It's the paralogical reasoning. They do one thing, but believing this is in fact producing this effect, when it in fact is producing the opposite effect, right? It's in fact the opposite thing. So, what you're seeing with Britain, it's incurable. In fact, this is the irony. This is the final point I'll mention to this. The other irony is that the only way to actually save Britain, if you will, right, or the British people, the English Irish, the English Northern Irish, Scots and Welsh, and whoever else.
We've been blurred in. We're all blurred in.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, everyone is cast off their national jerseys at this stage.
Yeah.
And we're all shivering in the queue. Marching forward into this blank, white, unknown future. It's the script has been changed. Said, look, lads, you're all the same. And we're like, no, we're not. No, you are. You fucking are. Get in the line. Take off your Ireland jersey. Take off your England jersey. Take off your Scotland jersey. Get in the fucking queue now. And you're like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? It's like it's a shock, a complete shock tactics.
Well, the Irish. There was something I was completely dumbfounded by when I visited Ireland, both in the West and in the East, in Dublin, is that Gaelic isn't really spoken. It's everyone speaks. Of course, the Scots speak English as well, right? Now, don't get me wrong; it's a certain dialect of it, but it's still English. If you're in a professional governmental setting, you're basically speaking near as damn it, or trying to, the Queen's English, speak the Queen's English. Absolutely. And this is something I don't think people are fully cognizant of. When you speak the language of basically London, because that's effectively what you're speaking with, the Queen's English, what you're in fact doing is, and you're not, I don't think people are even cognizant of it, it's unwitting, that they're in fact culturally realigning themselves, mentally realigning themselves with London.
Yeah.
And I noticed
they're
that
taking on that worldview, because it's so important that the language is it's how you perceive the world. It's imbued into the vocabulary, the lilt, the poetry of that language. It's all woven into those. You're absolutely right. Go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the issue is you essentially become a golem, a mere appendage of that.
Yeah.
And
that was done absolutely on purpose in Ireland. Like, I mean, again, it's a study. It's something I don't know a lot about, but overnight we lost our mother tongue. I mean, that was a serious feat of social engineering in itself. I mean, how did that come about? The education, like we were told in school, Irish suddenly, the Gaelic language suddenly was seen as, passé or something. But like, I mean, I myself could not tell you with a straight face how the Gaelic language died out as quick as it did, or when it died out, or what role did the education system play in it, or why did the public suddenly seem to abandon it, or how it died. I couldn't tell you. I don't know. Like, all around us. And then the weird thing is, once you accept the new language, it's like this false memory thing that you pointed out a while ago. Like, the use of the language after you accept the new mother language of English, the old language of Irish, when you use it in it has this kind of a hollow, like an affectation. It doesn't seem natural. It almost seems like an affectation, and it's been apprehended by. There's a kind of a certain trend in society, like it became trendy to use it. So trendy. You get people naming their kids, children after, old Irish, I don't know, heroes and stuff out of legends and archaic Irish names that have no actual reference or resonance in the modern time in a community setting or in any kind of a day-to-day use. There's stuff that's been taken off Wikipedia, or that have been taken out of some sort of trendy upper middle class kind of, I don't know what, you know what I mean? It became something that wasn't connected to the soil anymore. It was something that the bourgeois sort of upper middle class had as a kind of an artifact of identity, and it seemed extremely contrived and hollow. Like they hadn't grown up speaking that. They had to go back to, as I said, Wikipedia, or they had to pick the names out of the Gaelic name book, and they would have known nothing about the mythology. But then they'd find out that Fionn McCool, they'd cherry pick something out of the mythology and use a name, for example, for one of their children or something like that, and it was like all very contrived. And the language became something that was unpinned from the earth. It had lost any resonance in the.
I see it all. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
It's just a thought came to me when you were speaking. I totally agree. It's almost, this is what the world city does. It's what consumerism does, of course, which is something that almost becomes a resultant consequence of the urban sprawl, right? Where the urban bourgeoisie of the predominant city-state of a land, or even a region, or even, of course, the world, it spreads its seed, its cancerous seed, and again that produces consumerism. It produces this individualization and atomization, and from that, what you find is a commodification, thus a cheapening of everything within the rural or even foreign cultures themselves. I mean, believe you me, the reason they have mass immigration is because they're so utterly hubristic, those down in London, or wherever it may be, Paris or Washington, DC, or, LA or wherever, right? The hubristic cosmopolitan elite, they believe that, our culture is so great, it has such staying power, that literally by the magic soil, as soon as the dinghies hit this soil, the Arabic or Romanian or God, whatever, Syrian or whatever, all these people with thousands of years and, God knows how many generations of epigenetic memory, culture built from the land and produced from the land, will just simply give up their culture by, the magic soil of, say, I don't know, Britain or Ireland, or and they will simply just adopt in quick succession, in rapid fashion, and get into line and rank and file like the rest of us consumers, us deracinated consumers. It's not going to happen. It was a weird thing. It's a weird thing to believe, and it's something the Roman elite believed as well. Everyone would be Rome. As soon as you gave them the Roman citizenship, it was the magic piece of paper. They would magically become Roman.
I suspect that it's a kind of a Trojan horse, kind of, it's an act of war, really. That the long-term vision, the age of Aquarius, the new shape of society, entails abandoning all these formats like nation state, like cultural identity, like perhaps language. All of this has to be abandoned by these tribes, these primitive tribes, who are the national peoples, the French, the English, the Irish, the Scots. We have to abandon these archaic and anachronistic, vessels. These vessels have to be shattered in order to make way for the new vision, this new age, Homo Deus, the age of Aquarius, what call it what you will, this new great vision, the great work, right? The great work. It involves, because these were essentially natural edifices. Like the nation eventually arrived out of the family. Eventually, the family, the parish, the townland, the people gave birth to the nation. At some point, or the chieftain, or that kingdom. Call it what you will, at whatever scale you want to call it. There were eventually natural occurrences. So it's an attack on the natural order. It's an attack on nature itself, and nature as the order, if you will, of God, or of the creator, of that creative force, of the natural force in the universe. So it's an usurping, it's an inversion, and anything they perceive as having that natural fingerprint must be destroyed and reordered and reassembled.
Well, that's
all of it is. Yes.
Sorry, man. Please finish
Go
your
ahead.
point.
No, go ahead. That's it, pretty much. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree with you. In fact, I couldn't have put it better myself. It's effectively what occurs is that, and you see this with the demography too, right? But I agree. It's their usurping nature, and this is what the city builder will do. This is why you see the Lord of the Earth characters, or even masonry, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea of the craft and Tubal Cain and all this. Effectively, the conspiracy for this utopian idea of the New Atlantis or Ben Salem or the Great Work, right? The Magnum Opus. It's associated with this notion of the city, and that the city itself is the key to unlocking the door of heaven, and bypassing that threshold that delineates us from God, that we ourselves become the Homo Deus, the God-man, and from our ivory towers in the city. Now, of course, this is Faustian. It's completely hubristic. It's like making a deal with the devil, for unlimited knowledge and power. Eventually, you have to give up your soul for that. And this is the issue too. You see that in the city, the entire culture. And this is why it's so hollow today. There's a greater preeminence and a greater value placed upon building rather than begetting. And this is why you have the unfruitfulness of the culture itself. Well, not even the culture. I mean, what is it? It's this sort of weird surreality of culture that forms. And I see it. It actually kills me to go into Edinburgh now. I was in Edinburgh yesterday for my fiance's birthday. A little do for her, and we went out for food and everything. But you just walk down Princess Street and that. And don't get me wrong, it's a tourist hotspot, but effectively that's all Edinburgh has now become. It used to be the Athens of the North, the great cultural bastion of Scottish Enlightenment thinking and outgrowth. That this small nation could produce such intellectual greatness and such architectural greatness. This city, but it felt as though it was harmoniously entwined with the land, and it followed the contours of the great rugged hoary cliffs that flavor and characterize the geography of the place. But now you walk down and scarcely do you hear a Scotsman, right? Scarcely do you hear that that nice rustic brogue of the native land. And effectively there's a few times I was walking by certain people. Some were Asian, Chinese, and some were American tourists, and they're just surrounding these old statues of our military generals and our military, our prior military prowess. With the Highland regiments, and their officers, and they have the kilts on with the bearskin hats, and the various other fineries and the rigueur that goes with the military honor of their position, and these heroic men, and it's just been turned into essentially it's covered in seagull shit, and you've got these tourists that are just they know absolutely nothing about the history, and it feels as though they're cheapening it with this almost Disneyland-esque transformation of the city. The old ancient stones and the memory imbued within it of the nation has become this collective Disney ride, and it really is. To me, it's quite sick.
Well, it's trying to establish an identity. What's left? Who are we? And it's this globalist thing. It's the bigger machine, the citadel, the great work. It's to move away from that and to try and. These terms are very confusing. Irish, Scottish, English. Like, what do they mean? They're deeply personal, and they're very. I don't know. There's no way to pin them down. I mean, you have a sense of what it means to be Scottish. I have a sense of what it means to be Irish. They probably do mean something. They should mean something, I think, There's a shared history, identity, everything we have is sort of tied up in it. But yet again, what is it? It's it's a flag. So it should be something deeper or wider than that. It should maybe mean something like, you think of these people that fought for these things, died for it, like. So it must have meant something, because if it meant nothing, then really there's nothing to fight for as such. But maybe we have to kind of hammer out the identity thing a bit more, the meaning of what these things actually mean, that this But anyway, maybe a conversation for the next one.
Definitely, man, definitely.
Because I feel it as well. It's the final point. The lads that come to the site that I meet from Scotland and from England, from the north of England, there's something there like that. It's almost like two old warring tribes that are sitting near each other now. We've got a shared experience now, which has had an ironic unifying effect on us on some deep level,
Yeah, sorry, just final point. Actually, I've been studying recently Kamehameha. I think that's how you pronounce it. The conqueror of the Hawaiian islands and the establisher of the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1795. I've probably butchered that pronunciation of his name. Anyway, he... I was like, you have these 4 different islands, give or take, in Hawaii that makes up the kingdom, which would later be the Kingdom of Hawaii, and he conquered them one by one. And it's interesting because this idea of what the English, Irish, Scots and Welsh are going through, and we have this now common issue that affects us, which is that, we feel as though we're strangers in a strange land. It's something that's actually binding us together. I think it will create an amalgam culture eventually. I think we're actually going to become one nation, not necessarily artificially, but we're going to become one nation in time, in a sort of natural way, which is weird to say. But yeah.
I think you're right, but it's weird. It's kind of frightening as well, because the force is so overwhelming, is that our differences look negligible, and that massive force that's over our head is just we've realized, we're the same. But it's frightening because that force is so large. It took that size of that thing, that that new energy that's come in, to make us look and say, well, there was nothing between us, really. Look at the size of that thing. It's that versus us now. That's what's blurred the lines, but it's also sort of frightening because, we see more similarities. Like, it's not necessarily unhealthy that we would fight and row over borders and jostle on the football grounds and have little wars here and there. It's not necessarily an unhealthy thing, but
And now things have changed. This has changed the perception, I think. And I can see it. I see it in the lads that are coming and that we talk to. Where it's like, it's a different trip. And I can see people are struggling with it as well, because some people are still holding on to the old identities, and they're like trying to test the water. Like, well, where am I now? I thought you were my enemy.
Yeah.
There's a guy talking to there, and he was a Rangers fan, and he hates Celtic, and we're the Catholics, and the undertones of the old sectarian stuff was that.
Yeah.
And like, but at the same time, he's like, I can't walk down the street anymore because, I can't walk down the street. I feel like I'm not in Scotland anymore. So he's wrestling with the old jingoistic lag,
Mm-hmm.
a few pints and down to the football ground and taunt your enemy, like kind of thing. It's which he grew up with and clung to, and now it's like, is that relevant anymore? It's very disconcerting to him, because he sort of has to abandon that identity and try and repackage it or vis-a-vis this new world. So he's looking at his former enemies, who are an important part of his identity, because they were outside the extremes of his territorial self. They created his territorial self, and now suddenly, that territorial, that border is blurred or has disappeared. So he has to reassess everything that he's been taught and has grown up with. That's why I think and including his imperial identity. That was part of who he was. Is this apex kind of position he had on the pyramid has been fractured as well. So he's found out that actually the city has turned traitor on him.
Mm-hmm.
The city of London has turned traitor on him, and he's left to his own devices, and it's very confusing. It's an extremely confusing time, for people, I think, who's got to reassess all this stuff. And like, where do you go? Like, how do you compute?
Well, it's punch drunk. Eventually, you're in a point right now where it's your people are discombobulated, but eventually a Caesar figure will rise, and that will be the uniting. It will unite what's left of the remnants of the English, Irish, Scots, and Welsh, at least in Britain. And the only way to save these individual nations is to destroy the British state and British identity. It has to go. It's because it's artificial. It literally is built on the city of London, which is what I think. It's built around the Norman bourgeois class, which, like what you're saying, they used us and abused us. Like some sort of a dirty rag. They've chucked us away. Betrayed us.
But I suspect if such a rising was to occur, it may not necessarily occur around sort of nationalistic lines or religious lines, but it will be on class lines. It'll be like the working class, because don't forget that the English and the Irish, for example, and Scottish have a long history of working in each other's neighbourhoods and towns and motorways and buildings, and you started the conversation with construction, and like there's a long history of and armies, like they fought on the battlefield as well together, shoulder to shoulder, on behalf of the power structure. So there's a class unity there that is a sort of an undertone that's always been there, like a kind of a mutual respect. There's a mutual history there, which sort of transcends any of these other identities, so perhaps that that unity that is there may resonate, it may begin to reverberate, and kind of it may even become the foundation for some sort of a movement or something, like you're kind of hinting is going to happen, because I think they've had that shared experience both together, but also independently. Like they've worked in the factory floors, they've worked under the corporations, under the companies. They've been treated the same. They have the same economic kind of situation, same hopes, dreams, fears, challenges. They've been betrayed in the same way by their governments, by their own community leaders, perhaps by their churches, etc., etc. So they have very, very similar, and or perhaps even a kind of a racial thing as well. Unfortunately, that not necessarily racial in a skin color thing, but more like a kind of we're the hosts identity people of these islands. We're the original. We were the people who were here. This is our home, and so there's a resonance there as well across the tramples across everything. Now it may take a manifestation of a kind of it could be portrayed as a racial thing by metropolitan media who will want to blacken it and turn us all into the far right, right? The far right kind of, as you said, the outliers of the empire, the heathen Scots and the dangerous terrorist Irish and the whatever. So let's see how such a thing might something's going to manifest or not. Let's see. Anyway, dude.
Exactly. But yeah, well said. Yeah, man. So sleep well. Sleep well.
You too, man.
Fantastic conversation.
A great chat. We'll continue again because important in ever changing times.
Ever changing.
Punch drunk. Punch drunk, I think is the way to put it. Yeah, punch drunk at this point.
Exactly.
Okay, man.
Take it easy, man.
Take care, man.
Bye. Bye.
Good night. Bye.